Part 1. The First Meeting. Clara had always believed in love, but she had never expected it to come in the form of someone like Jonathan Hartley. At 22, she was fresh out of college and had just begun working as a junior architect at a prestigious firm. Ambitious, independent, and eager to prove herself, she focused on her career and her friends. Love was always something that seemed distant, a concept reserved for others. But then, Jonathan entered her life. He was in his mid-30s, tall, with salt and pepper hair, a strong jawline, and a smile that could charm the most indifferent of people. She first met him at a charity gala her company was involved in. He was the keynote speaker, a philanthropist, and a well-respected businessman who had made his fortune in real estate development. His charisma was magnetic. Clara watched him from across the room, captivated not only by his good looks but by the warmth in his eyes when he spoke. Their first conversation was brief, just a handshake and a few polite words about the event. But something inside Clara shifted. She couldn't explain it. It wasn't love at first sight, but there was a connection, an undeniable spark. Jonathan had mentioned his wife and children, and Clara had immediately respected the boundaries of their conversation. He was a married man, after all. Weeks passed, and Clara didn't think much about Jonathan after the gala. But fate had other plans. Her company was hired to work on one of Jonathan's major projects, and Clara found herself working closely with him. Each day, they spoke more, sharing ideas, frustrations, and successes. There was something about him that made her feel seen and heard, unlike any man she had ever met. He was kind, thoughtful, and, despite his status, humble. But it was clear that Jonathan loved his wife, Maria, deeply. Clara respected that and buried her feelings, focusing on the work at hand. Part 2. The Forbidden Attraction. Months passed, and Clara's admiration for Jonathan grew. She told herself it was nothing more than admiration, that he was a mentor and a friend. But slowly, as their professional relationship deepened, her feelings began to change. Every conversation felt electric, every moment with him felt like it lasted longer than it really did. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day on the project site, Jonathan invited Clara to dinner. It was to discuss some last-minute changes, he said, but the invitation felt different, personal. She hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. They met at a quiet restaurant, tucked away from the bustling city streets. The conversation started as work-related, but as the hours passed, it shifted. They talked about their lives, their hopes, their dreams. Clara learned that Jonathan had been married to Maria for over a decade. They had 2 children, both of whom were in their teens. But, despite the picture of domestic bliss, Jonathan admitted there were struggles in his marriage. His work consumed him, and his relationship with Maria had started to fade. They were more like co-parents than a married couple, but he never let anyone know that. Clara listened, her heart aching for him. It was clear that Jonathan was a good man, caught between loyalty to his family and the reality of his growing dissatisfaction. As he spoke, Clara couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to be with him. He was everything she had ever dreamed of in a partner: kind, intelligent, passionate, and caring. She knew it was wrong to even think about him in that way. He was married, and she was just starting her life. But the feelings she tried so hard to suppress had grown too strong to ignore. When the evening ended, Jonathan reached for her hand. The touch was brief, but it was enough to set Clara's heart racing. The moment felt charged with unspoken words, but neither of them said anything. They both knew what was happening but were unwilling to acknowledge it fully. Part 3. The Tipping Point. Over the next few weeks, Clara struggled with her feelings. She tried to keep her distance, tried to focus on her work, but the pull of Jonathan's presence was too strong. Every time they spoke, every time he smiled at her, her heart would skip a beat. Jonathan, too, seemed to be struggling. He would find reasons to linger near her desk or call her into his office for trivial matters. His eyes lingered a little too long when they spoke, and Clara could feel the tension building between them. It was undeniable now, they were both falling in love. But Jonathan's guilt was heavy, and Clara could see it in his eyes. He loved Maria, he had built a life with her, and he couldn't betray her. But love, as they both knew, wasn't always so easily controlled. One evening, Jonathan asked Clara to meet him at his house to discuss work in a more private setting. The moment she arrived, the atmosphere was different. The house was empty, Maria and the children were away for the weekend. They sat on the balcony, watching the sunset as the conversation turned personal again. "I've been thinking about you," Jonathan said quietly, his voice full of vulnerability. "I can't stop thinking about you." Clara's heart skipped. She didn't know how to respond. But before she could say anything, Jonathan kissed her, slowly, gently, as if he had been waiting for this moment for far too long. Clara didn't pull away. Instead, she kissed him back, pouring all of her longing, her heartache, and her desire into that kiss. It felt like a dream, an impossible, perfect dream. But in the pit of her stomach, Clara knew it was wrong. Jonathan was married. He had children. But the way he kissed her, the way he held her, made her feel like she was the most important person in the world. Part 4. The consequences. The days after that kiss were a blur. Clara and Jonathan continued to see each other, unable to resist the connection between them. But with each passing day, the weight of their actions grew heavier. Clara knew she was a part of something that could destroy everything: Jonathan's family, his reputation, and her own sense of morality. She loved him, but she also hated herself for betraying another woman. One afternoon, Maria showed up unexpectedly at the office. She had come to pick up Jonathan for a meeting. When Clara saw her, the guilt overwhelmed her. Maria was warm, gracious, and unaware of the storm that had been brewing between her husband and Clara. But as soon as Maria stepped into the room, Clara realized that the love she had for Jonathan was a fantasy, a fleeting moment in time that could never be sustained. Jonathan's phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Maria, asking if he was ready to leave. Jonathan looked at Clara, his face conflicted. He walked away to take the call, but Clara stayed behind, her mind racing. It was in that moment that Clara understood the tragedy of it all. The love she felt for Jonathan was real, but it was built on lies and deceit. She wasn't the one who was meant for him. Maria was, and the family they had built together was worth more than any fleeting moment of passion. Part 5. The end. Clara left the office that day, never to see Jonathan again. She couldn't stay in the city, knowing what had transpired. She moved to another state, distancing herself from the pain and heartache that came with the love she had lost. Jonathan tried to contact her, but she never answered. He was torn between his duty to his family and his love for her, but Clara knew that there was no way for them to be together without causing irreparable harm. Their love was doomed from the start. Years later, Clara would look back on the time with a bittersweet ache in her heart. Jonathan never left Maria, and Clara never found a love like his again. But she had learned something valuable, that sometimes, love isn't enough. And sometimes, the most tragic love stories are the ones that never come to fruition, the ones that are left behind, lingering in the silence of what could have been. The end.